Okay, welcome back to Open National Preparedness Month. It's not easy to say Preparedness Month is here, but it is important. So we have some tips and advice on how you and your family can prepare for a natural disaster. We welcome Chuck Frank, who's Director of Emergency Management at Metropolitan College of New York. Professor Frank, nice to have you with us.
Great to be here, Gary.
Before we even start talking about tips, why teach a course in emergency preparedness at a college? I mean, I've never heard of such a thing, but it seems to make a lot of sense.
Well, you know what? It's a post 9/11 field. After 9/11, emergency management became something that caught the imagination of people. And the idea is that if you teach folks how to prepare, how to respond, how to handle recovery, and how to handle mitigation, then disasters are not going to cost so much in terms of property and human life.
Unfortunately, you turn on your TV, and we've seen, hurricanes in Puerto Rico, and of course down in the Houston area, and most recently in North Carolina. I have to say, last night and even during the day, Bronx roads were flooded. So anybody who says, well, it only happens in the hinterlands, it only happens in places where, you're really subject to the environment. In fact, I saw last night, Allerton Avenue near White Plains Road was shut down because it was flooded. You never know. What do people have to know as we look at really a new reality in our world?
Well, I think a couple things. Right now we're in hurricane season. And we sit in New York City and we think we're somewhat immune to that, but we weren't for Irene and we certainly weren't for Sandy. And the Sandy recovery is going to be going on for quite a while.
Generations.
So you brought up an interesting point, which is rainfall causing flooding and stopping transportation. In New York City, if we get 2 inches of rain in 1 hour, everything's going to stop. Subway's going to stop because all the trash flows to the drains, blocks them, the water comes up, shorts out the hot rail, then the signals don't work, you're not moving by train.
And you've got people underground, you have people in stations, and of course you've really shut down the city. And even though it sounds like, well, I don't know if it can happen here, boy, I got to tell you, yesterday for me was an eye-opener. In my lifetime, I don't ever recall seeing that much rain. We get the flooding when it snows and melts, and then that backs up the sewers. But just for a rainfall in the middle of the day, you couldn't get off a curb anywhere because the water was so high.
Well, you think about Hurricane Florence recently down in North Carolina. They got 30 inches of rain.
Incredible.
We're talking about 2 inches of rain shutting things down here. And normally you get 4 or 5 days advance notice, but a day before the hurricane arrives, the outer rings of the storm are coming and they can provide that much rain.
So what do people have to know? Anybody who watches the news, looks out their window, gets a sense of, gee whiz, what if something happens to me and my family? What are the basic things you should think about or be prepared for in case something like that does happen?
Well, here's the main thing, and we're constantly battling human nature. The most important thing is to make a plan. Every individual has to have a plan. Doesn't matter if you live by yourself, if you live with a family. And people don't like to plan for events that they think may not happen. And so...
Also, because it's unpleasant. You really don't want to think about it. All right, we'll figure it out.
Well, that's a turnoff. As soon as you say, hey, Gary, you got to have a plan, you're thinking, I got a lot of other things to do.
Right.
I don't need to make a plan. But failing to plan is a plan. It's a plan to fail.
What goes into that plan? How to evacuate or how to keep yourself safe? I'm just guessing.
Well, that plan
what do you do in case of no electricity? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, the plan has 4 components. The first one is, how are you going to find out the information that you need to even know what to do? So
if the electricity is shut down.
That's right. So let's say we're sitting in your apartment. We've got a lot of choices. Probably both have cell phones. We could be getting push text messages. We might turn on the TV and watch it. What else? The radio. But what typically happens in a hurricane fairly early is power goes out. Now you and I are sitting in the dark. What are we going to find out?
Or how are we going to find out? And how do you find out? Now, I realize the cell phone could still work, assuming it's got power.
That's right.
Which will be of if you can't charge it up, obviously, it's not going to last.
So it'll work for a while.
Right.
Right. So then you're saying, well, I'll stay here in my house. I'll hunker down.
So what do you do? Or is there an answer? I mean,
There
get
is
a
a-
big sign that says help and hope a helicopter
No,
sees
there-
it, which is somewhat realistic.
There's an answer, but even deciding to stay at home, what we call sheltering in place, that requires a plan. I mean, you've got food in your fridge, but if there's no power making that fridge cold, that food's going to be good for how long?
Cans of tuna fish, peanut butter, and those kinds of things.
Right, all non-perishable items. Water is a significant item. Most of the time, people don't plan to have water. And then if you haven't planned and you're in your home, now maybe you're thinking, well, I'm going to have to go. That's what we call an evacuation plan. So if you have to go, you just don't walk out the door, right? So
You
I
have
thought
something with you.
you got to have
They call it
something
the go
with
bag.
They call it the go bag. So this morning I thought, well, I'll bring my go bag, right? Because you mentioned our campus up in the Bronx last year. They did a great program on readiness, and a guy named Hakeem Yamadi, who's like the godfather of emergency manager up here in the Bronx, he organized it. He said, please come, and he gave me a go bag. So I filled that thing with all kinds of great stuff, and this morning when I'm leaving the house,
You forgot it.
I can't find it.
Oh.
I can't find it.
Boy, you are just
Okay.
subject to what you're recommending. You've got to know where it is.
Yeah, and guess who did have a go bag? My wife.
Oh, so she...
My wife, right? She lives with an emergency manager. So I grabbed my wife's go bag because I can't find
All
it.
right, we don't have a ton of time,
How much time do we have?
a minute or two.
A minute or two. All right, so let's look at the first thing you
The
said.
first thing is a radio.
This.
I'm going through it real quick.
A radio, but this is a radio that you can fire up with a crank. Doesn't need batteries.
Wow.
What's in that thing?
This looks like
A
your
rain
medications.
jacket. This is medications.
Rain jacket.
These are bank statements. This is a copy of the license of the credit
This
card.
also looks like more medications.
Okay, so be prepared to bring medications with you. Look at this thing.
This is really well done, folks, by the way.
Okay, this is mine. She shouldn't have this. Okay, so
We've unveiled it.
that's right. But this is a power charger. They cost about $40. You can charge a dead phone with this in 15 minutes.
And that's how you get the information.
And that's how you keep power
Wow.
running in your house. You could run a laptop off this for several days.
Which would be unbelievable. The other thing, two things I want to mention. One is I don't see a flashlight, a simple flashlight.
It's right here.
Oh,
it's
there
on
it
the
is.
end of
It's
this.
on the end of that. Wow, what a handy dandy item that one is.
No, this is a great item.
The one last thing I want to bring up, many people in the Bronx are apartment dwellers. Now, I happen to live on an upper floor, and I always think to myself, gee, if there's flooding, I mean, I'm not going to get flooded out. I mean,
Right.
the whole world would have to be flooded out to reach me all the way up on the 14th
Right.
floor. But electricity will go. Once the electricity goes in my building, the water goes because the water pumps are all electric.
Elevators.
And elevators certainly go.
Right.
And one thing I want to add before we let you go, Professor Frank, if you have people who are infirmed, who are senior citizens, even children, those even more so than maybe you and me really need to have a plan, right?
Well,
I-
it's
goes without saying.
They need a plan, and other people who live nearby in that building need to take some responsibility to say, hey, if this
Mm-hmm.
happens. My wife and I had this. We have two 90-year-olds that live a few floors below us. Those people we're going to go check on.
We all got to work together. Professor Frank, people can register for the course. They can contact
Absolutely.
Metropolitan College of New York. This is right now more and more important. We thank you for bringing it to us on Open.
It's my
this morning.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Great.
lot, Gary.
Fantastic. We're going to be back. I've got a lot to think about now. We'll be back right after this.